Perfect. All right. My name is Erin Colbert. I'm the Great Health Advising Coordinator for the College of Health Science. Pleasure to have all of you here today to talk to you wonderful gentlemen about a really great opportunity for students to help pay for their education. So what I thought I would do is kind of hit you guys from a question point of view.
Sure.
So what would be the typical cost of medical school? What do you guys think?
$100K per year.
Okay, that would be maybe a private, a public institution. You think about like a private institution, like your Dartmouth or your Harvard, that might skyrocket to a little bit higher. The average is 150,000, and the reason it's an average is why there's the big guys and the little guys, right? And so the cost of going to medical school seems astronomical, and it might create some stress for you. But there are some opportunities for students like the Health Profession Scholarship through the military. Army is here today, so we'll reintroduce just because we're doing the recording.
My name's Sarah Matthews. I've been in AMED for about a year now. Other than that, I've been in the Army for about 18 years, 2 more until I retire. And this is my coast dog.
Staff Sergeant Toscano. I've been in the Army about 10 years, AMED around 10 months, and originally a 50 whiskey combat medic.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about HPSP. Basically, an opportunity for a scholarship. Is it a full ride?
Full ride.
It's a full ride. Can you tell me what is entailed in a full ride?
So obviously, if we give you a full ride in medical school, there's going to be some repayment in one form or another. And the way we get that repayment is after your residency, you're going to owe the Army 4 years on active duty. So at that time, you will be commissioned as a captain, so you will receive captain's pay and receive all the benefits that come with being in the active duty Army also. That's the only thing that is required for the scholarship. And then as you'll see in the PowerPoint, on top of the scholarship, you'll get a stipend every month of $2608. That just went up by about $200 this year, and it goes up every year on 1 July. Off like the consumer price index for the civilian side. So that's just money for you guys, again, to put in your pocket. Everything that the school requires, textbooks, supplies, stuff like that, can be paid for by the Army. The reason I say can be paid for by the Army is essentially the school has to require it, right? So they're like, we recommend you have an iPad. We recommend that you have this. It's going to be a little bit harder to get the Army to pay for it. But if it says we require you to have this, Army's going to pay for that too. So it does really allow you to put full focus on your studies and not worry about anything else. So, and there are a lot of other benefits too that we'll get into as far as, when you come to your residency or match and everything like that. And then as far as just the swath of different positions that you have in the Army.
So what it sounds like to me, what I heard you saying is that these individuals, they graduate with a bachelor's degree from Boise State University. They're applying to medical school or dental school. And what they're doing is in the application process, when they're applying to their programs and schools, do you accept all medical schools in the United States, including DO and MD?
So yes, we accept all medical schools in the United States, DO and MD. And if you're a vet, which I'm sure don't have me in here right now, but if you have any friends that are pursuing veterinarian, they actually accept Canada too. However, for MD and DO, we don't accept anything outside of the United States.
So that would include Caribbean.
Puerto
schools?
Rico. Puerto Rico's good. Caribbean schools, not so much. Those are not on our agenda of acceptance. Right?
Okay, so your goal as you're applying to medical school or dental school, is you want to apply early enough to those schools so that you get an acceptance. You can actually apply to the Health Profession Scholarship at the same time. And we would actually recommend you do that because they can get you through the entire kind of setup process up until the point where they're handing you off the scholarship because they have to have an acceptance for you to get accepted to the program. Can you tell a little bit about the experience of what would they have to do to apply to the HPSP?
So applying to the HPSP is pretty simple. Now you do, other than having your minimum MCAT score, and then you have to have minimum scores in your subsection, right? You're going to have to be physically and morally qualified, right? Essentially what that means is you're going to have to go down to a military entrance processing station, or you'll go to a military treatment facility, and you'll take essentially like a sports physical there. All right. Other than that, as far as your moral goes, as long as you don't have any thing that you're hiding in your record, you're not a felon, you're not a murderer, drug trafficker, anything like that, you should be pretty much good to go. And the nice thing about AMED too is they're a lot more lenient when it comes to waivers. So even if you have certain medical conditions or something that happened in your past as far as medical, usually we can get around that, but that's also why it's important to apply early. As far as the application process goes, I'd say it's probably not far off from when you're applying to medical school. You're gonna have your letters of recommendations that are specific to recommending you for the scholarship. You're gonna write a statement saying why you want to be an Army officer, why you want to be a physician, kind of just bring it all together. And then other than that, you're gonna fill out essentially the same thing that anybody that enlists in the Army fills out. You're gonna go through 10 years of your history, your residencies, your jobs, friends and family, and everything like that. Once we put all that in the system, we board every month. So every month, there's gonna be an HPSP board, right? We say the sooner the better, but to be 100% honest, we haven't met our health professional scholarship goals for about the last 3 years, right? So for some reason, you don't apply until the end, the chance that there's still gonna be a scholarship available to you is very likely. The reason we say the earlier the better is just get everything out of the way, so again, you can focus on what you're doing in school and not have to worry about what we do on our end. So the actual entire process can take, how long?
Around 6 to 9 months, give or take.
So, but that's from you starting the process to essentially commission, right? You getting selected for the board, you can start the process tomorrow, but depending on how fast you get this information, you get your packet done 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most, and then you can go to the board next month. The chance that you'll get selected, I can't tell you it's a guarantee, right? But again, like I said, we didn't meet our HPSP goal for the last 3 years. So if you apply to this program and you meet the minimum standards, the chance that you're going to get selected pretty much 100% in my station. Again, I can't guarantee that, right? But we didn't have a single med corps that didn't get selected last year. As far as dental corps, are you dental corps? Somebody was dental.
No, we have
They're
two
not-
dentals. They couldn't come today, so they're,
As far as dental corps, it's a lot more competitive. So there was about 70 dental corps, or last year it was like 75 dental corps scholarships, and about 140 applicants. So that's when it gets really, really competitive, and you have to look at what you're putting into your packet, your letters of recommendations, everything like that, right? But as far as the med corps goes, you meet the minimum requirements, your packet is well put together. The chance that you're going to get that scholarship in our station is guaranteed, right? And then what that guarantees you is that your med school is paid for of your choice. Doesn't matter what med school you go to, as long as you apply and you get accepted. We do have automatic acceptance criteria this year.
MCAT 507 with a GPA 3.6. So if you have that, you're good to go. You're accepted with for the scholarship.
100% here.
so if someone doesn't have a 507 or the GPA requirement, you guys don't consider them at all?
So no, there's waivers. However, that's just automatic acceptance criteria.
Okay.
For the minimum is 500 with the 124 in each subcategory. However, if you do not meet that, there are waivers.
Yeah, so we
What's
have
the-
MCAT waivers. So essentially, if you don't get that 500, and you do get accepted, you still get accepted to a medical school. You're still gonna be able to apply, but you're not going to board until the end of the year, right? And what that means is essentially the Army wants to see your end of year transcripts, right? They want to see essentially, they want to put that whole person picture together and kind of figure out maybe why you didn't score as high on MCAT, right? Now, everybody's a good test taker, and the MCAT is a brutal test. I don't know if anybody's had looked up any practice test questions or anything like that so far, or went any MCAT prep like that.
Get your stuff done first.
But it's brutal,
Get your
right?
classwork done first, please.
Exactly, yeah, get all your classwork done first.
Do that.
But know that that's something that you're gonna have to prepare for, right? Because that doesn't only affect the Army, it's gonna affect your applications to medical schools and DOs.
What about the dental?
So the dental, there is no minimum on the DAT for dental.
Okay.
Technically speaking, by regulation, it says 18, but we launch everything up at it. Again, the thing with dental is you want to be as competitive as possible. If you have a 17 and a 3.5, the chance that you're going to get accepted is not going to be as high as that guy that has a 24 and a 3.7, right? But again, the Army loves looking at what they call the whole soldier concept, right? They're not just going to judge you on one thing. They're not going to judge you on your transcripts. They're not going to judge you on a single test. They're going to look at everything, and that's why we build a packet. They're going to look at your application statement or your statement of motivation. They're going to look at those letters of recommendation, right? If you have letters of recommendations that are well written from people in positions of leadership roles or power, they're going to look at those and take those into account when they roll everything together. So that's why the application is very important. again, to do it early, so that way.
And it's the same with your application to medical school or dental school. If you are working on both of those projects together, oftentimes those will bleed into each other, the documents that you're going to need to provide. And on the flip side of that, the earlier you apply, the earlier you get what we call secondaries for medicine or dental school. And the earlier you might get an interview and an opportunity to be able to speak to someone and hopefully get an acceptance. For dental schools, they don't actually send out any acceptances until what we call D dates, the first week of December. It's my favorite night because usually at midnight, everybody gets their emails and then I get a follow-up email that says, for medicine, they can actually, a lot of the osteopathic medical schools, the DO schools, will start actually accepting students as early as October or November. So the earlier you apply, the better. And that can then increase your chances of getting this scholarship. In retrospect, looking at this, what are some of the reasons why a student has come to you and said, hey, I want to apply for this scholarship? And what are some of the benefits that the student gets besides the full tuition?
Obviously, the full ride scholarship, the stipend that's associated with it, and of course, you know, the military pay, retirement, stuff like that, TRICARE,
Okay.
free healthcare, stuff like that.
So the benefits that they just shared are the things that are on the back end too, just along with the front end. In a sense that you're going to medical school or dental school for the military. And then when you get out, then you're going to reap some of those benefits for you and your family.
That is a long way off, right? If you're gonna go to medical school, then you're gonna do your residency. You're not gonna pay back the Army until after your residency, right? So what does the HPSP help you do prior to that? A lot full focus on it. There's gonna be zero training while you're in school for the HPSP program, right? You will go to something we call DCC, which is direct commissioning course, right? It's kind of like basic training for officers. It's a general person's course. You're gonna stay in a hotel, you know what I mean? They're not gonna yell at you. You're just gonna learn basic stuff about, I mean, if you mess up, somebody might talk to you. But they're not gonna, you know, it's not like your typical basic training, right? You're gonna learn how to be an officer in the United States Army. You're gonna learn about rank structure. You're gonna learn basic land navigation. You're gonna learn those tasks that make an officer in the Army a soldier, right? But you're gonna do that in the summer that you're off. 2-week course, and then you'll be paid active duty pay for that, right? So on top of the stipend, you get a stipend for 10.5 months, and then you get active duty pay for an additional 2.5 months. And that's the training that you do. You're not. You also go through BOLIC, which is your basic officer leadership course. Every officer in the United States Army goes through BOLIC. And that's exactly what it sounds like, basic officer leadership course. They just hit on more of those things. Again, the HPSP program is going to give you full carte blanche to essentially focus on your school and what you need to do to excel.
Okay, I'm good.
Quite
Right.
big, you know what I mean?
We can hit on the numbers. I'm gonna move this so I can see it.
So, yeah.
But I do have a question that might help. So I think what I might want to do first, and then we can figure out where we need to catch up with.
Sure.
So put that up there.
That's all our contact information. Master Sergeant Freenor, don't worry about him. He's pretty much out the door. He's probably got about 3 more months here. He doesn't do a lot of work anyways. Just kind of hangs out in the office. But myself, Sergeant Toscano, and Sergeant Green will be here for pretty much the next 2-3 years, right? Which directly lines up with you guys. You can take down major rights information too if you want. She'll be here for a while longer. She's our station OIC, so she's the officer in charge, right? So she's going to be able to answer those questions that I might not be able to put so succinctly with regards to what officer life is like, or what officer life is like in the medical, right? I mean, I have a pretty good idea about it, and I think I can expound on it pretty well, but at the same time, she has direct experience.
Okay, so while we're trying to figure out where we are in the presentation, what we want to showcase on there, the thing I think that's really important, and I want to stress it, is that dental school is a little bit different than medicine. So dental school, when you go to dental school, you go for 4 years, and then after that, you're a general practitioner. You can leave and start practicing, and you can start paying back your commitment to the military. You can choose to do a specialty, and they do have some of those specialty opportunities in the military, if I remember correctly. And you want to kind of go for those. So going back to medicine and going back to medical school, how many of you know that once you graduate from medical school that you're not done? Good, right. You have to do a residency, right? You have to have a specialty that you focus on, or you can't practice medicine. The degree doesn't give you a ton of things other than give you access to the residency opportunity. So with military scholarship, you have access to not only the civilian residencies that you could choose to apply for through the American Medical Association, but you also have some military ones as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So with the civilian match and the military match, right, they recommend that you do both. Apply for the civilian side, right? Because on the off chance that you may not get accepted into military residency, you get accepted into civilian residency, there is the possibility they can still work that through with you guys. And you can train in that residency, right? But the nice thing about the military match is that one, there's an interview, right? So the typical civilian residency match, there's no interview process, it's just a packet, right? You go through there, and that's how your residency is selected. So with the military match, there can be an interview process as well as your paper process. And it's actually around 10% higher selecting rate than the civilian match is for the residencies that you select. So,
Okay, so maybe we went through this really fast and furious, and so maybe like you can kind of see the process of what they were talking about with all of those nice little codes that they were sharing with you, right? So all the steps that you have to take to be able to become an applicant and also receive your scholarship. So those, again, I would really stress the importance of doing them the same time you were applying, because your advisor, even though I'm only here till Friday, is expecting you to do it as early as you can, but as correct as you can. So you want to do it at the same time.
yeah, and really up until this point, this is the only process you really have to worry about. After
step
that, this is pretty much all of us, right? So step 6 through 7 is essentially when your packet goes up to the board, it gets selected, and then after selection, of course, there's going to be onesies and twosies, things that we need to have to raise your right hand, sign your contract, and you'll take the OPAC, which is
That's a little fiscal.
it's not little. It's not little.
I mean, it's,
You're gonna go through.
yeah.
It's a 5-event physical fitness test. What are 5 events?
So we have the ball toss, medicine ball toss. We have
On your head with a
yeah.
10-pound medicine ball.
We have the suicide basically. We have the deadlift. We have oh, that's just the deadlift, right?
You got a plank, and then you're gonna have a 2-mile run at the end, right? Now, at the same time, too, this isn't something you need to be worried about right now. It's honestly not something that you need to be worried about during the process. You're gonna have time to train for this. We're not just gonna be like, oh, hey, you gotta do this OPAC. Not just that, this OPAC qualifies you to commission, but again, this is the next time you're gonna go to training. Not for a very long time, right? So you really have time to prep yourself for this stuff. And at the same time, you know, if you commission and you're gonna be a physician for the Army, they're not just gonna be like, oh, hey, you didn't do good on the OPAC, goodbye. You know what I mean? You're a valuable asset to the US Army. So they're gonna make sure that they do what they can to work to get you to that. So will we. I'm just gonna leave you out front. We're gonna walk you through this process from cradle to, for lack of a better term, grave.
What's the ceiling on age? Even though these young folks look very young, what's the ceiling on age?
We have something called Apple MDT recruiting, essentially how we pre-qualify people, right? The A in Apple is age. We don't use that name. Technically speaking, there is an age limit, but we put in a 32-year-old thoracic surgeon last year. I mean, a 62-year-old thoracic surgeon last year, right? So if you have the qualifications to join as a physician, the chances that you're going to get in are pretty high. Now, again, that does depend on what specialty you're applying for, because sometimes there's just less physicians and sometimes there's a lot of people that are applying for it. But as far as the actual age, no concern of ours.
Is there any medical conditions that you would say are like, nope?
So again, with the way our waiver process is, I'm going to throw up everything because I'm not the deciding authority. Okay? I can look in the Army regulations, which is called the DOTI. And I can see that, say, for instance, taking medication for ADD is a disqualification, right? But just because it disqualifies you doesn't mean you can't get a waiver. And I don't have an authority to tell you whether or not you're going to get that waiver. So I'm going to do all the work and send it up, and we're going to get a decision on that later. Now, there are intricacies to the process that we go over. We make sure that you get specific doctor's letters, clearance letters. You know, we have to look at your previous history and everything like that. But again, the Army really recognizes the value of these physicians. So there's a lot more leeway on these waivers than there's typically going to be on a non-professional enlistment contract. So there's essentially your total pay and allowances for the year, right? Now, at the same time, the little asterisk right here, right? So the housing allowance is based on the University of Utah, right? The reason we did that is because all our allowance for housing, even when you get to the active duty, is going to be based on the zip code that you're in. So it's going to be based on the zip code of the school that you go to, right? Now, the only time you're going to get that housing allowance, as you can see, is during your active duty training, which is what we talked about with the DCC, the housing, and then your subsistence, which food, right? Other than that, the stipend is what you're going to get for the majority of time for 10 months. You have $27,000 play around with. It's your money. It's not for the school. It's for you. That way you again have less to worry about, more to focus on when it comes.
So we talked a little bit about this.
Let's go.
So just to tap on this, you guys are going to be able to focus on your studies, right? Biggest thing that a lot of the applicants that come to us basically are stressed out, right? They're stressed out. They have to go to work, they have to go to school, but this program, just go to school.
And again, payback time starts after residency or your fellowship. There are fellowship opportunities too, right? There's a lot more to training and advanced training in the Army than is what is just readily apparent, right? Like she brought up that after dental school, you become a general dentist, what we call 63 alpha, I believe, right? Say for instance, you didn't do the HPSP program. You can do direct accession into the Army and join as a physician, right? As a dentist, it's a little bit harder, right? But say for instance, that 63 alpha joins and he wants to specialize in something a little bit later on in his career, he can. There's a chance to do advanced training in maxillofacial surgery, which is pretty intense with regards to training. I'd say even on the medical side. So now another thing we have too is we do have 3-year HPSP programs. Don't necessarily apply to you guys, but it may later on down the road. This might not be the program for you right now. When you get into medical school, something may click, right? So we do have 3-year programs also. The 3-year scholarship is the same way. You're gonna owe 3 years as opposed to 4, but with a 3-year program, you get $20,000 bonus too. You want to take that bonus, the Army's going to tack on an extra year.
If a student who maybe didn't get to come today, because I'm assuming you guys are not in the military, none of you are. If the student that maybe was in the military already, like is on the enlisted side, like wants to have a conversation with you on their opportunities, because I think you guys have another type of scholarship that they can do.
So if he's already in, like say for instance, because he's probably not going to be in school on active duty, right? So he's going to be in the reserve.
Right.
He qualifies for everything they qualify for. The only thing is we have to get something called a DD 368, which is conditional release. The conditional release is going to take them out of the reserve and give them to us when that time calls for, right? And that's why we brought NPS recruiter over here today, is because when it comes to freshmen and sophomores, like I said, chance that you could use a little bit of help here now, it's pretty good, right? And there's going to be benefits to joining the Army Reserves in the sense that specifically when it comes to those harder boards like dental, if you're in Army Reserves, the board is going to look at your prior service and it's going to be a benefit to you above other applicants that weren't prior service, right? Because you already have that experience in the military, right? So that's why it may make sense for a sophomore or a freshman to join the Army Reserve, aside from the benefits that you're going to get from the Army Reserve.
Can you talk a little bit about I know you mentioned that there's military residency and the civilian residency. We talked a little bit about that. So it's a year for the obligation for the commitment, but in the military, there's expectation that you have 8 years of service. Is that still correct?
So, yeah, so there is going to be 8 years of service, right? So, and that's why you see the ADSO. That's your active duty service obligation, right? There's 4 more years of obligation, but those 4 years tantamount to a potential call up in the sense of something catastrophic, right? Now to say that can't happen, I'm not going to do that, right? But at the same time, there hasn't been a call up for the IRR. I think roughly probably since World War II, probably before that, right? Because the thing is they're going to go with the reserve, they're going to go with the National Guard, they're going to call all those up before you get called up. Now at the same time, during the COVID pandemic, they did call a few physicians and doctors up, right? But again, that was a pandemic that the United States had never dealt with in their life. So in that sense, you may get called up to do temporary duty. At that time, you know, paying benefits that are gonna go as active duty too.
And does the military residency start to count towards those 8 years of service?
Definitely not, no. So after your residency or fellowship is when you actually,
Yeah.
is when you're,
Not the commitment,
oh,
we're
okay.
talking about the.
So the 8 years.
The active, the
No,
inactive,
So the inactive,
because they used to be that way.
Yeah, the residency is not gonna count towards the inactives, but again, at the same time, I can't stress that it's inactive, right? You do a 4-year contract in the Army, you're gonna get out. When you do your
That's true.
inactive time, there's no reporting. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to maintain height, well, technically, you're supposed to maintain high weight standards and everything like that, right? But again, you're not reporting to anybody. It's completely inactive on that side of it. There's just
So-
that small chance that you could potentially get reactivated.
So for this benefit of the students, what would be the main perks for doing a military residency?
The main perks,
I would probably say the acceptance rate. So we normally have a 10% chance higher on this.
you can stay right there too.
Yeah, that's actually.
Get back.
Is that it for the back one?
Yeah. So we have a higher first time special people pass rate compared to the civilian side. It's a huge thing. Of course, our residencies and our fellowships, we have more compared to the other branches. That's a huge benefit that we offer compared to the other branches.
So, I mean, just look at the slide right here, 29 to 33% of your active medical corps are gonna be in graduate medical education at any time. We're the largest program in the military, right? I say this all the time, even when I did normal recruiting, you know, you'd have kids come up to me, why not Air Force, why not Navy? I'm not saying not do that, right? I'm not saying don't, you know, apply for all of them, right? Spread yourself out. You apply for Army HPSP, apply for Air Force HPSP. The only thing that I ask of you is that I'm gonna offer you that commission first, I expect you to accept that commission. If for some reason you don't make it in the Army, you have backup. You have the Navy and Air Force, right? But what separates everybody else, what separates us from everybody else are the in-house training programs, the sponsored programs that we have, and all the specialties that we have. You know, you kind of look at it like Amazon compared to Kmart. For lack of a better term, the Air Force is Kmart.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for the clarification.
Maybe could be Walmart. So these are some of the training hospitals, where you go. Now, that's not specific, that's not saying that you won't go somewhere else. Once you start your active duty obligation, right? The Army has positions everywhere. That's just some of the training hospitals where you could potentially do your residencies at. Those are a few of our residency programs, but again, there's more within those. How many residencies do we have, Dr. Sana?
So we have 101 residencies in the
Fellowships?
Making it work for it.
right? So I pass it around so you guys have an idea.
All right, and that's a little bit more about the match too, right? And again, like I say, I've recently read a really good thing on the match. So 85% will match into their first choice. If for some reason you don't, you have a rebuttal too. And again, the nice thing about the Army match is that you have an interview process. So if you've interviewed and for some reason you want to rebut and it goes well, you have a chance of getting a specialty that you otherwise, or residency you otherwise wouldn't get that.
Is
You don't
it,
get that chance.
is it true that the military residency batch process is first before the regular?
It does occur prior to this.
Do all of you understand the match process? I know, I mean, I always end up talking to different people, and so sometimes that throws you a little bit of a loop. Do you guys know how it works? Roughly, okay, so maybe it might be a good thing just to kind of explain it, and then it'll kind of fit inside what they're doing with the military residency match process. So you go to medical school, and typically curriculum is based off of 4 years. The first 2 years typically, and I say typically because every school is going to have different curriculum and different structures. If you use the University of Washington, for example, they do an 18-month didactic, that's the science stuff, and then they jump right into clinical rotation.
It's a 3-year dental school.
Yep. There's a couple of them back. Roseman now is full.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
free.
I might go to that too,
Yeah, they're free now.
which I like.
But medical school wise, what ends up happening is, so after your first 2 years of didactics, you will have taken your step ones of your board examinations. And then in your third year, you'll be taking your step two and you'll be doing your clinical rotation. So you'll be exposed to all of the different like branches. So you'll get internal medicine and family practice, and there'll be some very specific ones you have to do. At the end of your third year, after you've taken step two, you will be going into the residency match process. And you will choose to go into the military one, and then you can hop in the civilian one. Basically, what you'll do is your medical school will give you the opportunity to do what we call auditions. And so the military residency, doing an interview is kind of like that, but an audition would be you get to go to that site and you get to actually show your work, show what you're doing, and you get to pick electives based off of the residency specialty you are going to. You're doing that. Well, you're throwing your kitchen sink at it. So you are saying, I want to apply to these 23 residency programs. And you interview with all of those folks and you do a couple of rehearsal auditions with those schools, those programs. And then you go in after you're done, after you've gone through your cycle, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to 23. And you say, this is my top to my 23. Well, the residency match process is doing the exact same thing. They're going back through and they're going, this is my top candidate, my second candidate, my third candidate, my fourth candidate. And then the computer magically goes and picks you a residency match. And so the reason you see percentages like what they're saying in terms of first choice, 85%, still matching, but maybe the 15% didn't get their first choice. So what ends up happening is you pretty much are stuck. There's no wiggle there. But let's say you don't get a match at all. Well, then you kind of have to figure out what you're going to do, or you can't go, but because you can't practice medicine, right? And so match rates are really important. And so when you're talking to medical schools, you need to hear that. You need to ask, what are the match rates for them? Okay, 96 is kind of the national, 95 is kind of the national average. There are schools that are higher than that. So keep that in mind. And I think that hopefully helps you understand that the military match process is similar but different. And so you kind of have to keep those things in mind too.
Again, it's just more opportunity why the HPSP might make sense for you, right? We have civilian sponsored fellowship training opportunities as well as military, right? So you can imagine that civilian match potentially still do training with us, right? The expectation of utilization tour following residency completion prior to fellowship training, right? So anything prior, you have to complete everything prior to accepting any type of fellowship, right? It's still not a guarantee, but there is that potential for additional training through fellowship, right? So a little difference for the dental core. You can throw it out there.
We have the AEGD, which is Advanced Education in General Dentistry. These are some of the programs that you will go to if you attend that program. Now, it is mandatory to apply. You don't necessarily have to accept.
So these are some of the training specialties, I assume.
Right? Yep.
Okay. This is a good one.
And again, it's like I said, so again, why HPSP, right? And you can see the 50-meter target up on there. There's a typical target that you're going to see on an Army qualification, right? Because if you're an officer, you're eventually going to go to. As a physician, you're not going to go to a whole lot. You will see that at some point in time in your career, right? When you see the 50-meter one, you're going to see the 300-meter, right? Long-term planning. What are the benefits of the HPSP in the long term, aside from what we've just discussed? Right? The military lifestyle, the military training. Now that may not be necessarily appealing to you right away, right? But there are a lot of other benefits, right? You have your health care, you have your dental care, which is all going to be free because you're active duty. You have your paid vacation year, right? How many?
30 days.
30 days a year, right? And then not just that, you have the travel, right? As an officer or physician, you're probably going to be in that place for 2-3 years at a time, right? So the potential for you to get a duty station after your residency and then move to somewhere else is very high. And that's just more experience for you in the long run, right? Not just that, you're networking, you're working outside of your boundaries that you otherwise wouldn't as a civilian, right? Which is just going to give you further experience down the road. It may bring you into something that you otherwise didn't realize you had a passion for too.
The one thing I forgot to ask about was, and I'm asking because obviously things change. With a military residency, they're getting paid as they're getting paid though. They get a little bit better salary than maybe a civilian residency does.
Oh, yeah, typically, I mean, you gotta look at it like that, because in the residency, some residencies, as far as I know on the civilian side, you don't necessarily always get paid either. Now, typically, I mean, that changes a lot, right? You look at McDonald's now, they're offering scholarship programs. So everything's leaning towards recognizing the worth of people and what they do, right? But as you go through the residency, you're gonna be paid as a second lieutenant, right? And then after residency, you're gonna commission as a captain. So you will be paid, I don't know if we have that slide on here. We should.
Yeah, I didn't see it in there.
I didn't see it. I think it's only the finance.
So,
You will receive, a slightly higher than average salary as a resident than you would on the civilian side, right?
and I'll be honest with you guys, some of those residencies, they pay as well as I make, and I do not make a lot. My husband gets really upset about that. You have a master's degree and you get paid what?
All right, not always fair. So again, why Army and HPSP, this is kind of that long range calendar you looked at, right? One of the things that we didn't bring up was there's no malpractice insurance company. I mean, no malpractice insurance. You don't have to worry about it. The Army's gonna take care of that, right? And where else does that go? You don't deal with insurance companies. So you get to practice how you want to practice, right? I think we all know that sometimes insurance companies can really dictate how a hospital or how a physician is gonna operate, right? My partner works at a physical therapy hospital. And a lot of times, they have to release the patient early. They're not ready to leave that hospital. They're not ready to walk on their own, or they're not ready to be completely on their own, but because of insurance, they don't have a choice. That patient is gone. That's not ever gonna happen in the military, period, point blank, the end. Not just that, some of the other Army benefits, you're gonna have your commissary, your post exchange store, which those are actually getting revamped too. No tax on the stuff that you buy, right? Small thing, like in Utah, and I bring this up, I don't know, a lot of you guys might not be of drinking age yet, but all the liquor stores are state ran, right? Taxed at a lot higher rate than your typical alcohol in other states. At the military class 6, you don't have to worry about that. Alcohol tax free. And that goes for everything else, electronics, everything like that, right? They're even taxed on Amazon now. You know what I mean? You have a little thing on the bottom that says your typical taxes that they didn't have 3 years ago, which I love. But Uncle Sam's got to get his money one way or another. Could you go back one slide for me? One of the other things, right, is going to be your thrift savings plan and retirement program. That's huge, right? Especially I think now with the economy and with the way that the Fed's moving, the potential for the stock market to keep going the way it is very high, right? There now might be a lot of green grass on that side for some time to come. But at the same time, our thrift savings plan is outperformed on a regular basis. Is it outperforming right now? No. Is it as bad as some of the other mutual funds and everything out there? Not at all, right? And the thing is, if you start applying when you first get into the Army's going to match you up to 5%, right? It's free money. Not to say that there aren't better sides on the civilian side, but some of them might not even have something that the Army has, and you're free to choose a fund that you want. You can look around. So again, there's a lot more to it than just what you typically think of in the Army.
So, to you, what kinds of questions do you have for this gentleman?
And it doesn't have to be HPSP specific. It's Army Life Plan.
And if you don't ask him, I'm going to, so.
I have a question. So typically, so I know a lot of students take a gap year, does doing that impact your eligibility at all for the scholarship?
So the question is, if I graduate with my bachelor's degree and then I want to do a gap year while I'm in the application process.
Not at all. Because the thing is the application process is going to start when you apply to med school, right? You don't have to have an LOA yet. The only time you need a LOA, letter of acceptance, is prior to commission, right? So essentially, we start the application process with a list of schools. So if you take a gap year, as long as I have that list of schools, your conferred degree and your official transcripts, we can start the process. So gap year is not going to hurt. Now, once you start school, once you start medical school, you will finish medical school. If you don't finish medical school, Army's gonna get their money back somehow, right? So be aware of that too, right? But at the same time, if you reach that point, you get to medical school, I find it highly unlikely that something's gonna happen at a point where you don't continue on with what you wanted for that long period of time.
So Jake, what I would also say is that what he's telling you is the moment you start applying, that's when your clock starts. Okay. Other
How many gap
questions?
years does he want?
Great question. Other questions?
And just to add on to that, so if there's like extenuating circumstance, like you have, death in the family or something like that. The Army will work with you, and that's gonna be, oh, you're not going to school, we're gonna cut your funds or whatever the case is. Now, as long as you notify whoever your PO, your point of contact is, you should be good.
Which you'll have one throughout school. We're not just gonna send you to the wolves in med school and give you money. There's gonna be somebody you can contact if there's any issues when it comes to your pay, right? There might be a stipend issue, there might be a scholarship issue where your school is like, hey, what's going on? You will have somebody you can get in touch with and figure that out, right? If you wanna say, hey, I didn't receive money for this, you know what I mean, this required textbook, then there's gonna be somebody you can contact and work that out, right? So that way you get the most out of the HPSP and keep it before. Anything else?
Any questions? Yeah.
What happens if you don't get into like med school with your first application? Like, would that affect the scholarship program?
So the question is, what if I don't get into medical school the first time I apply?
Yeah.
So if you go through our process, you give us a list of schools you applied to, and you don't get any of the selections, you will not be able to commission, but it doesn't mean you can't read next year.
You have to
But you will
reapply.
have to, you can't just ride that. But like I said, as far as the medical core goes, the slots are gonna be there, right? Now, that may change. We may lower the slots, but actually for the next 3 or 4 years, our med core slots are usually going up by 10 or 15 a year. Right, again, like I said, we haven't met those metrics for the last 3 years, probably more than that. I've only seen the chart where it says we haven't met by the last 3 years. It's usually by about 35, 40, 50 scholarships. Right, a lot of those are people, like you said, might not graduate, so that scholarship falls off, right? During the pandemic, there were a few who didn't want to get vaccinated. They refused to get vaccinated, and offered a scholarship, you have to be vaccinated in 20 hours, so they fell off. So there's extenuating circumstances, right? It's not always that the applications just didn't get applied for. Sometimes you can apply for them, can't finish, can't commission. So, but their slots are always gonna be there.
Other questions?
Are you good?
Yeah, but just to add on to that, just to ensure that that does not happen, make sure you guys apply to study school, both ND and DO. I would recommend at least 10 to 15.
So the national average for medical school applications per applicant is 17. Boise State average, our students typically, because of cost, they're somewhere around 13 to 15 schools. There is financial assistance programs where you can, if you fall below a certain level, you can get 23 schools through the MD branch, and then the DO, they have a separate application for the waivers. So yes, you should apply to multiple schools, but you should also be smart about your schools as well. The advice that I can give you is that if you're thinking about, let's just use the number 10 because it's nice and even. So you're thinking about 10 schools. 6 of those schools, so 60% of those schools should be smart. In other words, your residency doesn't play a role in regards to your inability to get into that school. So I heard California and I heard New Mexico. Hi, yeah, University of Washington, probably not an option for you. You also need to make sure you meet their prereqs and that you sit in a good position for their stuff. That's the perfect schools. The other 20% should be midliners. They should be, hey, I'd really like to go here. I maybe have a little questionable issue with my residency, but also I really want to go here. And the last should be dream school, because gosh darn it, they'll commission you at Harvard.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
They will. And I actually have three graduates from Harvard. One of them was an HPSP for Air Force.
So I mean, you know, it's your school of choice, as long as you have that acceptance. And she's 100% right. You really got to spread yourself out across and be realistic about what you're applying for, right? You know what the average for the MCAT score for MD is?
Yeah, it's 510 is the sweet spot.
510 is the sweet spot, right? And I
So
think
510 or above.
I think that's slightly below what the average on the actual test is.
Osteopathic medical schools, typically it's a 506.
Little lower, right? And there's nothing wrong with DOs. I know that at least now it's getting a little bit direct, right? DOs got a lot of flack, I think, a few years ago. Even still, I think it's looked at a little bit differently. I love DOs. I've got 3 back surgeries. I've had a discectomy, a laminectomy, and a fusion on my lower back. So with a DO, man, they treat everything. You know what I mean? It's not, they just don't get in there.
So, and we tell all of our students here, we ask them to do good research. and basically find a fit for you. Most of my students will apply to both DO and MD. There are some that are just like, I can't buy into it. It's not who I am as a person, as an osteopathic medicine. But I will tell you that, we have students who apply to both, and some will get into osteopathic medical school, get an acceptance. We already have 3 acceptances to ICOM right now. And they'll probably interview at University of Washington or other schools and get in, and they'll probably choose the cheapest route. But you know, if you have an HPSP, then you get to choose where you want to go. But here's what I would say is just make sure you do your research, figure out the schools that make the most sense to you. And I would make that list as big as you can within reason. In other words, I know somebody, I know a student who applied to 100 schools.
Gee.
I fell out of my chair. I
How long
was so
did it-
angry at her.
How
because-
long did it even take to apply to?
Oh my
school?
gosh, well, the
Yeah.
primary is easy, right? You just go boom, 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 boom. And then the secondaries, she filled out 70 of them. She interviewed at 30 places. I was like, this is too much. I'm like, I can't believe you did this. And she got into the Mayo Clinic, good for her, but it was overkill. It was overkill. You should not do that. I would say 25 is kind of like, is a little high, you know? So I think you have to do what you can cost effectively afford.
I do have a question for you too. I think it was in regards to, wasn't it with the University of Washington? It was Idaho, right? Who that guy that we talked to, when we were at BYU. Is there some,
Stable pay.
there's like a state scholarship program that you have that will essentially also pay for your school?
So it doesn't necessarily affect these folks, and are you an Idaho resident? Are you?
If you're an Idaho.
Yeah, so it does, so I'll just talk about it. So Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho have a fabulous, we have a region of healthcare that we're trying to provide. Those 5 states have enormous trouble being able to provide patient to physician ratios. So in 2017, Idaho was ranked 50th for patient to physician ratio. That sucks. And this day and age now, because of what they've done in terms of the state legislature and residencies and trying to increase seats and things like that, we're ranked 47th. So there's something to be said about this program. It's pretty unique. So each state has seats. Idaho has 40 seats through the University of Washington. We also have 10 through the University of Utah. The programs run very similar in the sense that we have probably about 200 Idaho applicants for one of those 40 seats, 200 applicants for one of those 10 seats, versus University of Washington residents, it's like 3,000 for 160 seats. Okay, so your competition is diminished because of that component. The way that it works is that if you get one of those 40 Idaho seats, you're an Idaho resident, you get one of those 40 seats, you pay a differential cost. So you pay like you're a state resident in Washington, basically. You pay the University of Idaho graduate level tuition for the 18 months. And then after, you get to choose your clinic rotations of your choice. You can do an Idaho clinic rotation. You can do your entire clinic rotation in the state of Idaho, except 8 weeks in Seattle. Okay, and you can also do the safari thing. So you can hop between all 5 states. You can go to Alaska for a little bit. You can do all rural medicine if you so choose. You can do some of their trust and RUAT programs if you want to be a general surgeon, family practice doctor, women's health, those internal medicine, those kinds of things you need. Okay, so after you graduate, you go off to residence. You can go resident anywhere you want. Starting this year, an Idaho resident that gets a whammy spot has to either come back and work for 4 years in their state, or they have to pay back the out-of-state tuition.
So might be asking, why did I bring that up? I mean, it is a great program, right? But at the same time, there aren't going to be those, those paybacks for scholarships, those paybacks for that, right? And you look at it, you got to come back to Idaho for 4 years, whereas.
Which most do. 80% of the students who do participate in the whammy program come back to work in our state because we need the doctors.
And why pay back all that money that you were
Yep.
given in the first place, right?
Yep.
Well, with the Army, you're not gonna pay back anything, and it's all free.
Yeah.
Other than your pay.
But but they'll accept a whammy student, so accept a
Yeah.
UW student.
100%, and then it takes you out of that obligation too. So if you did the whammy scholarship, say for instance, you did whammy scholarship your first year, and then you apply for HPSP third year, your HPSP is gonna trump that, you don't have to pay anything. So it's a pretty good deal.
Other questions? I have a couple that I want to ask, but I'm gonna see if you guys ask them. You guys have any other questions for them? Do I have to deploy?
That's a maybe, there's no guarantee. I,
No guarantee you won't though.
so for example, I've been in over 10 years now. I don't combat that. Never been to combat. I've done some missions, like I said, COVID mission over in Colorado, but that's the summit of my deployment.
I've been in 18 years and I had 36-month deployment time, right? But I was also an integer. So that was my job to essentially not necessarily deploy. But the onus that my job was going to deploy was that, right? As a physician, your deployments aren't going to look like your average military deployment, right? When I deployed to Iraq, I was on a 15-month deployment. So I spent 15 months in Iraq, Baghdad, and Kuwait, north of breadbasket. As a physician, they're not going to burn you out like that, right? Because your job has a lot more, I'm not going to say, I can say a lot more stress than my job had. But at the same time, they want you fresh on your game, right? So your deployments are going to be a lot shorter. And at the same time, you're not going to be on the front lines like I was. Now, is there that possibility? Sure, you can volunteer to go to a forward operating base, potentially do some stuff there. But at the same time, if you're a surgeon, you're going to be like at a World War hospital doing your job, right? There's a chance you could do the beginning of a humanitarian deployment, like I said, with the pandemic call up, and then like your deployments that you did, or your missions that you did. I'm assuming you had physicians with you too,
So
right?
yeah, so there's OBGYN, all kinds of different specialties, a bunch of nurses, so.
The Army has training rotations. They do training rotations in Africa, South America. They do training rotations in a lot of Europe now. You can get slotted for something like that, right? But that's not the typical deployment that she was referencing in regards to that. So are you going to deploy? Probably going to deploy sometime in your career. It's going to be combat deployment. I can't say whether or not it's going to be combat deployment. I can tell you that you're not going to deploy combat right now, right? But by the time you complete your residency, I don't know what the geopolitical situation in America is going to be at the time. So if you're in the military, there is that chance that you're going to deploy. But if you're a physician in the military, yes, you're going to deploy. It just depends on where you're going to go and what you're going to do. But there are benefits to deploying also. You get substantially more money.
If these students are very interested in this scholarship opportunity, is there a venue for them to talk to students who are actually participating in it or have completed it?
Oh, easily. Not just that, I can put you in touch with, pretty much, I can put you in touch with an applicant at any point in their application process. If you want to know what MEPS looks like, I can put you in touch with somebody who's going to go down there on Wednesday, give you a really fresh idea of exactly what MEPS like. If you want to know what a third-year student in medical school is like at HPSP, I can get you in touch with somebody who does a third-year student. Not just that, but we also have access to other SPEs or subject matter experts, physicians, doctors. I mean, we virtually have a unlimited amount of people we can contact and give you a better point of view or answer questions that we frankly can't answer, right? Because the thing is, my job, I'm not AMED. I am an AMED in the sense that I'm a recruiter, but I was never in medical. Right, I went through CLS training and some EMT. I'm really far from what you guys are shooting for, right? So there may be some questions that are hard for me to answer. Maybe some questions that are hard for him to answer, even in his medical background. So we're going to put you in touch with somebody that can do that. So you really get the black and white, and you can make that informed decision that you want to make.
And I would strongly suggest that. The other thing too, I was gonna curious, this is just between you and me. What,
It was on video and in front of them.
I know, and then I'm gonna need a favor from you. I'm hoping that you guys, you're right, could locate a Boise State student who went through the Army HPSP, and we could get a hold of them to do an alumni spotlight, because
Easily.
Veterans is November 11th, and we would like to showcase a veteran that.
They probably love that, yeah. That's too easy. You give me the first and last name and I can look them up.
No, I mean, I need you to find somebody.
Oh.
So
oh,
locate a Boise State alumni
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
that did an HPSP
Yeah.
that we could reach out to.
I
And
can
then
search
you
by
give us the
school.
contact information and we go out.
100%, yeah.
So that's why it's between you and me, because they don't need to do anything.
Yeah, you don't have to do it.
Okay.
Uh,
Any
but-
other questions? All right, I'm gonna turn off the recording and then